Welcome to the Birth Launch Podcast, an empowering space for expecting and new parents to hear candid conversations with experts and learn how to craft your ideal birth. We will tackle the scary and weird questions that come up along the way and provide answers that are driven by science and evidence-based recommendations. I'm going to show you how to redefine parenthood and choose what's best aligned for you and your goals. With 10 years of experience in family education and a master's degree in human development and family studies, I'm ready to help you navigate pregnancy and explore your birth options to free yourself of fear surrounding childbirth. My goal is to help you have an informed and confident labor experience, plus an empowered and joyous postpartum. Becca, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm very, very excited to be talking about this topic today. So I think a lot of people probably understand that blood sugar is important. I wonder how many people actually understand what your blood sugar is truly doing in your body. I know that's something that my education around is very shallow. I don't know too much about it. I'm one of those people who I've heard it in the doctor's office. We know that it's important to maintain your blood sugar. We know that we shouldn't get it too high or too low, but as far as like the true science behind it, can we kind of start there? I think that's a great place to open this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question to understand a little bit more about like why is blood sugar important and why do we not want it to be too high? Why do we not want it to be too low? Things like that. And how does that relate to your fertility? So it's important to understand like what blood sugar is, right? It's necessary for us to be alive to have a certain level of blood sugar. So we're always going to have sugar floating through our blood at all times. We don't want it to be too high, too low, like we mentioned. But I would say it's a little bit more rare for us to see that like low blood sugar. It is possible, but I think we tend to be a little bit more concerned about that high blood sugar. So we can kind of start there. But what can happen with high blood sugar is if we have too much carbohydrate in a certain meal, that can cause a little bit of a high blood sugar and can cause swings in your blood sugar. And it also causes the release of a hormone called insulin. And we might have all heard of that hormone insulin too, but maybe not truly understand what that does. And it kind of comes down to insulin when we're talking about fertility, because high levels of that hormone insulin can be disruptive there. So when we eat a high carbohydrate meal or a high sugar meal, it doesn't have to be just sugar, like having desserts or things like that. It can be a high carbohydrate meal. So it can be, eating lots of bread or things of that nature that are a little bit higher in carbohydrates. And I do want to preface that by saying we need carbohydrates and we don't want to, keep carbohydrates out of our diet. But we do want to be cautious of the types of carbohydrates we're eating and how we're balancing that out with the rest of our meals. So when we eat a high carbohydrate, high sugar meal, that causes the level of your blood sugar to go up. And in response to that blood sugar going up, your body produces or releases a hormone called insulin, which helps to bring your blood sugar back down. And so we can kind of think of it like a lock and key mechanism. Insulin will help to push blood sugar into your cells to make sure it gets into the cells. So it opens up the door for that sugar to get into your cells so we can keep the blood sugar level stable. And so the more sugar that you're taking in, the more insulin your body is releasing, and high levels of insulin can cause inflammation and hormone imbalances and things of that nature. Does that help to understand a little bit more about insulin and blood sugar?
Yeah, how about low blood sugar? So we talked
Yeah,
about the high blood sugar. What about the opposite end of the spectrum?
absolutely. So low blood sugar is the opposite and typically can be caused by not eating often enough or not eating enough carbohydrate in your meal. So low blood sugar symptoms can normally be like dizziness, fatigue, things of that nature. And typically it's caused by not eating enough, or sometimes we can have those swings if we do have a high blood sugar swing. It's kind of like a roller coaster effect. So when you have a really high meal, sometimes you'll just, or a high carbohydrate meal or high sugar meal, your blood sugar will go really high and then you'll come crashing down. Like if you're on a roller coaster, it will sometimes dip below what your original baseline was, and that can cause a low blood sugar and kind of cause some of those cravings for more to help, that's that your body signal to say we need more glucose, more energy, more carbohydrate to get you back up to that state where your body feels most safe. But typically it's caused by not eating often enough. So we see that like dip in blood sugar as well.
Okay, and a lot of this comes back to carbs that you're eating. So, are there better carbs than others in supporting your blood sugar that we should be kind of prioritizing if we're going to have carbs or when we have carbs? I agree too. Just like overall, I agree. We need carbs. Like, don't go on a no carb diet, especially if you are pregnant. You need carbs to be able to, have a healthy pregnancy and even people who are trying to conceive in your fertility journey. But what carbs should we be prioritizing?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, because it's not about like demonizing one type of food. It's just
Yeah.
about trying to understand what causes these things and how we balance things out. But there are definitely different types of carbs that are better than others. So typically we want to think about, we maybe heard the term refined carbohydrate or processed carbohydrate, which typically refers to things that come in packages. And so how I like to describe it is, when you think about foods, you can think about it in, how did this get to my plate? And so if you have, I like to give the example of a sweet potato, which is a carbohydrate, and it's a high carbohydrate food, but it's more of a whole food, right? So you can kind of picture your farmer taking the sweet potato out of the ground and putting it on the truck and sending it off to your grocery store, versus, let's say, a muffin, right? Where it's a little bit harder to visualize how that muffin, maybe it came in a package, how it got to your plate. It's not really in that whole food form. It's using sugar and refined flour and things like that to be made and to get to your plate. It's a little harder to visualize how that food got to your plate. So that's what we would call more of like a processed carbohydrate. So really anything that comes in a package, has a long ingredients list, is going to be more of a refined or processed carbohydrate. And not everything that comes in a package is super refined, but that's more of a generalization. But if it's hard for you to visualize how that food got to your plate, like a Cheez-It or something like that, right? It's not really close to nature. That's more of a refined carbohydrate. So we want to focus those refined carbohydrates versus those whole food carbohydrates are going to be less optimal for our health. And we really want to think about trying to incorporate more whole food carbohydrates versus those processed carbohydrates. So more examples of whole food carbohydrates would be fruit, potatoes, sweet potatoes, squash, rice, beans, things of that nature, over things like crackers and cookies and muffins and some breads and things of that nature.
Yeah, that's super helpful to know. I think a lot of people associate sugar intake with like fruits or juices or candies, things that, obviously have sugar in them, but a lot of people don't realize that carbs are a lot of times what do it. We do need to be intentional with their intake. Okay, so if
Right.
someone's out there thinking, gee, that could be me, whether they don't eat often enough or they often have carb heavy meals, maybe even late at night, and they wake up nauseous during the night. If someone's out there being like, wow, this could be me, what are some signs that you might be struggling with blood sugar dysregulation? I know you had already mentioned some for low blood sugar, dizziness, and that nausea, and high blood sugar is that big crash. But are there other signs that people may need to tune into that maybe can them that they have this?
Absolutely. There are many different signs. And I would say the big one is that feeling of being hangry. We all know that feeling, right? You're just really, really hungry. Maybe you haven't eaten in a while and you have that kind of like mood swing that's more associated with needing to eat, that can be a sign of maybe like that blood sugar dropping. And that can be a sign of being maybe more on that roller coaster that we were talking about, of that like high and low blood sugar. So that's a big one, kind of like that hangry feeling that we all know is a big one. And then another key one I like to mention is a good sign that your blood sugar is well regulated is if you have a meal and you don't feel hungry for about 3 to 4 hours afterwards. And a sign that maybe your blood sugar is imbalanced is if you have a meal and you feel hungry pretty immediately after that. So like, let's say you have your breakfast and then an hour later you're like, gosh, I'm hungry again, I feel like I could eat another meal. That could be a sign that your blood sugar could be imbalanced, and maybe you didn't necessarily balance out those macronutrients, or what we would say like protein, carbs, and fats are like those three. And we've been talking a lot about carbs, but maybe that your breakfast was a little bit too carbohydrate heavy and you focus too much on the carbohydrates and not enough on the other two, which can help to stabilize your blood sugar. So feeling constantly hungry is a good sign. And then another one could be sugar cravings too, which is interesting because we think about, high carbohydrate intake as causing blood sugar dysregulation, but that being on that roller coaster can lead to craving. So when you have more of that low blood sugar, you have that high blood sugar, then the low blood sugar. When you're at that low point, I think I mentioned sometimes your body wants more and it's like, we need more energy. So now that can cause a little bit of a sugar craving to get that, because your body knows that the best way and the fastest way to get your blood sugar back up is going to be to have more sugar. And so cravings can sometimes be more like physiological than we think. A lot of times we're like, oh, I have those sugar cravings and like I just can't resist and it's just how I am. Sometimes focusing on balancing your blood sugar can really help with those sugar cravings. So those are some signs.
Okay, so we've talked about, or I've heard you mention fertility and trying to conceive a couple of times. Talk to us a little bit about what we need to know about the impacts of our blood sugar on our fertility journey, or how it may impact people who are trying to conceive.
Absolutely. So I would say first and foremost, it goes back to when trying to conceive, you want to think about your egg quality. And so egg quality can be really important. And when we have inflammation in the body, that can impact your egg quality. So something we want to think about is egg quality. And when we do have blood sugar fluctuations, which leads to those higher levels of insulin, that can cause inflammation in the body. And so that can impact your egg quality. So we really want to think about creating stable blood sugar levels to make sure your inflammation levels stay stable, which can in turn impact the quality of your eggs and also the hormone balance in your body. So I mentioned that insulin is a hormone, and when insulin is imbalanced and is in concentrations in the body higher than we would like, that can have an impact on your other sex hormones that are necessary for that, like, that delicate dance that is required to, those hormonal fluctuations throughout the month that help you to ovulate and things of that nature. So when we have kind of like that imbalance in hormones, when we have a higher level of insulin, that can cause other sex hormones to be imbalanced as well. So that's kind of how it can impact fertility.
So anyone out there who is trying to conceive, but they've never paid attention to their insulin levels and their blood sugar, if any of this sounds like you, it may be worth diving into this, or at least asking your provider, finding a provider even that understands how blood sugar might impact your fertility journey. This is the first time I'm hearing this. So this is wild. This blows my mind. I don't think I've ever thought about how blood sugar can impact your egg quality. But when you think about the endocrine system and its impact on hormones and egg quality, it makes so much sense. I just never have put two and two together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's definitely worth it to ask a provider just to even look into this if you're thinking about conceiving, especially if you're having difficulty conceiving. It's something that maybe gets overlooked a little too often. And I will say it might not be like the exact root cause of why maybe you're experiencing fertility struggles, but it's definitely a piece of the puzzle and can have a major impact on your overall fertility. So I would definitely recommend asking your provider to get this just looked at, just to make sure it's not contributing to any struggles with your fertility.
Yeah. Okay, and how often are OBGYNs or IVF doctors going to know about this? Is this something that people can go and expect their doctors to be really well versed on, or is this going to be something that you might need to seek either alternative support or either supplemental support in this?
Yeah, great question. So I would say it depends. It is definitely more common of a sign and symptom of the condition called PCOS or
Mm,
polycystic ovarian syndrome. So if you do have a diagnosis of PCOS, then your OBGYN is more likely to look into this. I would say typically for those who have that PCOS diagnosis, maybe you have more of these signs and symptoms that you're talking to, or you're talking about this with your OBGYN, they may look into it. But I definitely see that this can be a problem even with women who don't have PCOS, and we don't look into it because there's not that diagnosis, or the OBGYN may not look into it because there's not the diagnosis of PCOS. So I would say it depends on like how you present. It's pretty common if you do have that diagnosis of PCOS for your practitioner to talk to you about blood sugar, maybe not to the extent of like maybe talking to a dietitian or a nutritionist about this with, but it's mostly addressed in PCOS and not as much in other conditions.
yeah. Okay. So if someone knows that, let's talk about someone who does not have PCOS
Yeah.
and they know maybe they don't do necessarily the things that we're talking about here. They do go maybe hours and hours all day and not eat. I'm guilty of this. I get deep in work and then I look up and it's 4 o'clock and I haven't had anything since breakfast that day, right? Or
Mm.
people who are like, oh my God, my main dinner 6 out of 7 nights a week is carbs and garlic bread. And, I eat carb. For people who have that lifestyle or fall into those categories, me as well, what are the chances that making some tweaks to our diet will be enough to kind of, reverse this? Are there lifestyle things that we need to do in conjunction with these things? And I guess how impactful are these things? Are we going to be able to maybe reverse this completely and get your insulin back in balance? Is that possible?
Absolutely. It's absolutely
Cool.
possible. And the choices that you make every day can have a positive or negative impact. And it's not like something that can't be fixed. Like you said, if you're somebody who doesn't eat till 4 o'clock, or has really carb heavy meals all the time, it's something that is easily fixed. I mean, lifestyle changes are hard to make, so that
So
can
hard.
be the most difficult part. Like if you are somebody who doesn't eat often enough and you're having low blood sugar symptoms, or maybe high blood sugar symptoms, if you're having those higher carbohydrate meals, it is very fixable. I think the hardest part is just changing your ways, right? It's like a lot of people know, like when we think about eating healthy, I feel like a lot of people will say, I know what to do. It's just hard to implement,
Yeah.
right? We know what a healthy diet really is. Sometimes it can be hard to understand exactly what that means specifically, but I think that's the hardest part, is trying to make that change, or like having breakfast on a daily basis, things like that. But it is extremely, it's extremely possible to make these changes and have such a positive impact. I will say for women with PCOS, it's a little bit of an uphill battle because it's just a little bit more difficult for those women. Unfortunately, they have a little bit of a difference in hormones, and hormones can be hard to change. It can take a while. I like to say nutrition is slow medicine, and we need
Mm.
to be patient with it. So we need to, stick with those things that we know are healthy habits, and make sure we don't give up on them, because they can be extremely helpful. after a longer period of time, but it's definitely possible to make sure you're fixing this dysregulation in your glucose levels and your insulin levels.
I love that you say nutrition is slow medicine. It's like nourishing your body. You're like truly healing your body from the inside out with the foods that you put into it. There are so many examples of like ailments, even like skin things, mental health things that can be changed by just tweaks in your diet, right? By just being intentional with what you put in your body. I love that. Okay, working out is another lifestyle thing that came to my mind. How does this impact our blood sugar? What do we need to be, doing, I guess, eating before versus eating after? What you choose to eat? Is there a difference in these things? Just make sure you eat. What do we need to know about that?
Yeah, great question. With exercise, interestingly enough, exercise can actually cause your blood sugar levels to go up. If, let's say, you were monitoring your blood sugar, there are like continuous glucose monitors that you can use to like measure your glucose constantly. And people with diabetes will use these things more commonly. So let's say you were constantly measuring your blood glucose, you might see doing exercise actually causes your blood sugar to go up, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And it's not like a major spike or anything like that, but it will sometimes, exercising can release energy and cause your blood sugar levels to go up, but that's a positive thing. So that's just a side note. But as far as like eating before exercise or eating after exercise, I would say it's individual and whatever feels good to you. I would say for certain individuals, they say, I could never eat before I exercise. I just don't feel like eating in the morning. And I feel fine when I exercise on an empty stomach, and that's totally fine. And then there are those individuals who will say, if I exercise on an empty stomach, it makes me feel nauseous. And so I would say really listen to your body in that way, and time your exercise, because exercise is extremely important for an overall healthy body. It's great for your fertility. I would say time your exercise when you're actually going to get it done. So we want to set yourself up for success, right? So if you would never exercise in the afternoon because you feel really exhausted from your day, then you don't necessarily want to set yourself up like that and try to exercise in the evening if that's not what feels good for you. But I would say to try to always refuel your body after your exercise within an hour or so, to have a meal that's high in protein after your meal, and make sure you are refueling after exercise because you can deplete your blood sugar levels from exercise. So if you exercise and wait too long to eat afterwards, that can for some people cause a little bit of an issue. So I'd say the number one rule there would be just to try to make sure you do refuel with something within an hour of exercise for healthy blood sugar levels.
Yeah. On the topic of like eating like on a almost timed schedule, one thing that comes to my mind when we talk about blood sugar and nausea is morning sickness. So, you guys, if you're out there and you are struggling with morning sickness, think about how often you're eating and what you're eating. A lot of times we will find in our clients, and kind of anecdotally, women share that if you never let your belly get completely empty, it can really help kind of stave off a lot of that morning sickness, that nausea feeling. So a little trick that we love to share is set some almonds or some nut butter or some crackers by your bed, so that throughout the night you can set little alarms every 2 to 3 hours, even every 6 hours. Some people can go and eat something, and then your belly never gets completely empty. Some people can even go all the way through the night, and just before they get up in the morning, they have a little something. So give that a try. Okay, Becca, I have a question about our favorite foods. So I'm thinking about all the sweets that we all love. Okay. So when we talk about blood sugar, I think a lot of people maybe shy away from this conversation because they're like, I don't want to give up my ice cream at night. I don't want to give up my yogurt in the morning, right? I don't want to give up the things that I love and that are staples kind of in my diet. What do we need to know about balancing maybe our favorite foods that we know are high in sugar, but also not making food a miserable experience for us?
Absolutely. I love that question. I think it's so important to talk about this because when we talk about the conversation around carbohydrates and sugar, those things can be demonized. And I'm here to tell you that you do not have to give up your ice cream at night and the things that you really enjoy. It's just really about structuring your diet to accommodate for those blood sugar swings and make sure you're not just only having carbohydrate heavy foods, sugar heavy foods, things like that. So my tip is that you always, let's go back to your ice cream example, right? Like, let's say you're somebody who just loves to have a bowl of ice cream every night, but you don't want that blood sugar swing. Maybe you're trying to have a baby and you want to be cautious of that, those blood sugar swings we've been talking about. So what I would suggest is to have your dinner. You want to make sure your dinner is really high in protein. So we're talking about some type of animal protein. I typically recommend well sourced, some type of fish, some type of chicken, beef, turkey, something along those lines. Even eggs can work well. Those are more breakfast for breakfast though. For most people, make sure your plate is centered around protein to make sure you have a good portion of protein. And the reason why this is because protein is a buffer for carbohydrates. And so if you were to eat a carbohydrate heavy meal without any type of protein, let's just say you had that bowl of ice cream for dinner, your blood sugar is going to go really high. But let's say you had your protein rich dinner first and then you have your bowl of ice cream. It's like a buffer for that blood sugar spike. So the more protein you have in your belly, the more blunted that blood sugar spike is going to be. In addition, vegetables are great. So the fiber in vegetables can also be a buffer for that blood sugar spike, as well as healthy fats. So we're thinking about things like olive oil, avocados, nuts and seeds, things of that nature. So going back to what I was saying before, when I said we really want to have a balance of those proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, those three macronutrients, those things are going to be buffers for your blood sugar. So if you have a plate full of, let's say, a big piece of fish with lots of veggies and maybe a little bit of a sweet potato, something like that is a good example of a well-balanced meal, and you have lots of protein and veggies. And then my tip would be, don't wait until maybe a few hours after you eat to have your bowl of ice cream. So you want to have your ice cream pretty close to when you finished your dinner, because your belly is still going to be full of that protein, those veggies, those buffers we talked about for that blood sugar spike. So you have that nice, well-rounded meal, and then you have your bowl of ice cream, then your blood sugar spike is going to be a lot less than if you were just like wait 2 hours after your meal and then allowed your belly to empty, waited 2 hours, and then had your ice cream. And that's probably closer to bed too, so also not the best option. So really enjoy your desserts a little bit closer to your meal times, and that's going to help to that blood sugar spike. And then my other tip for that is, let's say you can't do that and you have your ice cream a little bit after dinner and you're like, oh, I don't really feel like that helped, because I like to have my ice cream a little bit after dinner. What I would say is have your ice cream and then go for a walk. So what walking can do, or a little bit of light exercise, it doesn't have to be anything intense. I think walking is typically the easiest, but you could do some jumping jacks or whatever it is. But what the key is to make sure you're moving your muscles. So what can happen with blood sugar is when you have higher carbohydrate food or higher sugar food, and then you go and move your muscles, that blood sugar is going to help be absorbed into your muscles and won't cause as much of a spike. So when you're moving your muscles, that's where blood sugar tends to go. Sugar is stored in your liver in a smaller quantities and in your muscles. So when you're moving those muscles and, freeing up that space in your muscles, like we were saying before with exercise, you release that sugar when you exercise. And so you have a higher carbohydrate food and then you go and move your muscles, that sugar is going to be able to be more easily stored in those muscles. So studies will show even like a short 15-minute walk can reduce your blood sugar spike by like 30% or so. So just going for a little bit of a walk, doing some muscle movement can also help with that blood sugar spike.
That's awesome. Okay, I didn't know those tricks. I do have a question, just a clarification about like what is pretty close? So when you say like consume your ice cream pretty close to dinner, are we talking 15 minutes, 30 minutes, within an hour, rough estimate? And I understand this will probably be different for everybody, but what a little bit more than pretty close.
Yes, great question. I would say within 30 minutes or so.
Okay.
And it will be different for everyone. Everybody has a different kind of like transit time through the gastrointestinal system. But I would suggest within like up to right away, obviously it's totally fine, up to like 30, 45 minutes, maybe pushing it a little bit, but 30 minutes about. And typically it takes about 2 hours for your blood sugar to rise and fall. So yeah, if that's helpful at all, like if you were monitoring your blood sugar, you would typically see your blood sugar, your peak blood sugar about 1 to 2 hours after you consume that meal.
Cool. Okay, now I would love to maybe talk through the three meals of the day, and you give us some pairings of good proteins and carbs that we might pair together for those individual meals, especially for somebody who's just kind of starting off on this journey.
I love that. That's
Cool.
great.
Okay, so let's start with the obvious, breakfast.
Yes. Okay. So breakfast for protein, I mean, really, there are so many great options for breakfast. And I like to say you don't have to have breakfast food for breakfast. Anyways, but we'll stick with some breakfast food. So just keep that in mind. You can always have leftovers from dinner or whatever that is. But a eggs are a classic breakfast food, right? And I will say 2 eggs typically is not enough protein, which will surprise some people because that's like the classic, like 2 eggs, that seems like a good amount of protein. 2 eggs is typically going to be about 12 grams of protein. And I would suggest trying to get in 20 to 30 grams of protein at breakfast. So we're missing a little bit there. So 2 eggs can be a great start to get enough protein at breakfast, but typically what I would say for your protein would be maybe 2 eggs and then like 3 pieces of turkey sausage or something like that. And that's going to get you to be a good amount of protein. And then something like some berries, so like some blueberries, strawberries, or any type of fruit you like, an apple, something like that, are a great carbohydrate to add. And then I would even add, I know you didn't mention fat, but I would even add some type of fat in there. So like maybe some avocado on your eggs. And a bonus would be if you could like throw in some spinach in the egg. So like a really great, well-rounded breakfast could like look like 2 eggs, 3 pieces of turkey sausage with some avocado, almost like you could make an omelet out of that, if however you like to structure that, with a side of fruit for your carbohydrate.
Nice. Okay, and what about lunch? It was really helpful to hear how many grams of protein we should be aiming for at each meal as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So lunch, we could also go for some type of animal protein. I know as we're going along, maybe you get the sense that I am a big fan of adding animal protein into the diet for fertility. And so we want to go for some type of animal protein. So a great option could be some tuna with mix in some mayo or whatever you like in there. I like to throw in some pickles in there for a little bit of flavor, like a little tuna salad. So tuna is a great protein option. So maybe mix in a little tuna salad with some veggies on the side. So like some carrots or celery, things like that. You could even throw in some crackers in there to eat the tuna salad with. And I know I mentioned earlier that crackers tend to be more of those processed carbohydrates, but when paired with a high protein meal and some veggies, that could be a great option because we're not just having those carbohydrates on their own or those crackers on their own. So those processed foods can fit in because they're super easy. So I would say doing a tuna salad with some crackers and some veggies like carrots and celery on the side could be a great option for lunch.
And how many grams of protein should we be aiming to get at lunch?
Yeah, I would say around 30 as well. I would say 20 to 30 is good, but I would like on the higher end of that, around 30. And I would typically say about 30 per meal is good. And then in snacks, trying to get about like if you're doing 2 snacks a day, trying to get like 10 grams of protein in a snack. So
And what are some snacks? A handful of almonds.
yes, absolutely. So handful of almonds could be a great snack. Hard-boiled eggs could be a great snack too. So we mentioned that 2 hard-boiled eggs is 12, or 2 eggs is 12 grams of protein. So that could be an amazing snack. I also really like jerky sticks. So I really like the Chomps brand jerky sticks. They don't have sugar in them. They're really well sourced. So like a turkey jerky stick could be a good part of a snack. And adding in some carbohydrates into that snack too could be really great. So let's say like a jerky stick with an apple and peanut butter could be a great snack, or some almonds with 2 hard-boiled eggs could be a great snack, or some hummus and carrots with some type of nut could be a good snack as well.
Nice. My mouth is watering. I love those snacks. Okay, and then what about dinner? What should we be aiming to have at dinner?
Yeah, absolutely. So, dinner, let's go to some red meat. So, this actually is something that's, I feel like, a little controversial. I feel like a lot of people are scared of eating red meat, but red meat is extremely nutrient dense and it's a fertility superfood. It is extremely nutrient dense. So I would say don't be scared of red meat. So let's go Taco Tuesday since it's Tuesday. And I would say incorporate some red meat into your dinner and make sure you're centering a lot of veggies around that. So let's use ground beef as our base for that taco meat. And I would say go for a grass-fed version of that. And it's going to be a little bit more nutrient dense. So grass-fed beef for your taco base. Do some whole grain corn tortillas, and then we can throw in some veggies on top of that. So some tomatoes, some chopped romaine lettuce. I really like to do like a cabbage slaw because cabbage is really nutrient dense and great for our fertility as well. And throwing some veggies on there is a great way to also balance that blood sugar like we've been talking about. So a grass-fed ground beef taco with a cabbage slaw on top. And maybe you could even do an extra side of veggies and some avocado, your favorite toppings, and that would be a great blood sugar balancing dinner.
Okay, one thing you didn't mention that I have on all of my tacos are cheese and sour cream. I guess
Cheese,
that's
yes,
two
yes,
things.
yes,
So, what
absolutely.
about dairy? Is there anything we
Yes.
need to know about dairy and our blood sugar or anything off the top of your head of like dairy and fertility?
Good question. I cannot believe I forgot to mention cheese because cheese
I
is one
love
of
cheese.
my favorites too. So dairy is also one of those things that I feel like a lot of people have questions about. So there are people out there that are sensitive to dairy. And if you are one of those people and you know you eat dairy and it upsets your stomach, that is something to take note of. And probably not the best idea to be incorporating dairy if it does cause digestive upset or you just intuitively feel like it's not great for you. However, dairy is a very great nutrient dense food and great for fertility for those of us that don't have a sensitivity to dairy. It can be an extremely fertility friendly food, and I would say I typically recommend don't go for the low fat dairy, go for the full fat dairy. Fat is extremely important for our hormones, and our hormones are actually made from fat or cholesterol. And so we want to have the right balance. We don't want to have too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, but making sure we're getting enough fat in our diet can be extremely helpful for fertility. So I do recommend going for full fat dairy if you are trying to conceive. So whole milk, full fat cheeses, full fat cottage cheese, full fat yogurts, things like that. So dairy can be a great food to incorporate for fertility
Nice.
if it sits well with you.
Yeah. Okay. And how many grams of protein are we aiming to get in dinner?
Dinner is typically a little bit, I would say a little bit higher and a little bit easier to get enough protein at dinner. I think breakfast tends to be the hardest one for people because like common breakfast foods are not as high in protein, like oatmeal, pastries, muffins, things like that. But at dinner, I would say somewhere between 30 to 40 grams is a good aim. So about 10 grams more than your other meals.
Nice. Okay. This has been so helpful. I feel like I've learned so much. Again, I mean, I started the conversation here, but I mean, blood sugar is something we know is important. We know we need it to live. We know we should keep it within the parameters that are healthy. But I think truly understanding its impact kind of longer term or on our hormones and how the things we eat and the things we do, so our daily activities impact our blood sugar, is new to so many people. So this has been fascinating, Becca, truly. If somebody wanted to work with you and connect with you and learn more, if they thought they were struggling with some blood sugar issues or they just wanted to learn more about something that we said today, where can they connect with you and what kind of offers do you have?
Absolutely. So my website is littlelifenutrition.com. So my practice is called Little Life Nutrition. I do take one-on-one clients. I work a lot with blood sugar balance and PCOS and many other conditions. I mainly work with women who are planning to get pregnant or struggling to get pregnant. So my practice is Little Life Nutrition, littlelifenutrition.com. I do offer a free one-on-one consultation for 30 minutes to make sure we're a good fit for each other. And so I do work one-on-one with clients. My Instagram is just at Little Life Nutrition. And then on my website as well, I do have a free fertility foundations diet guide. So you can download that on my website, and that can give you an idea of a little bit more of a document that goes over some of the things we talked about today as far as how to structure your plate and what are whole food carbs versus processed carbs, things like that. So you can download that for free on my website.
Nice. All right, you guys. Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you are walking away with as much information as I am walking away with today. Check us out over on YouTube. We are Tranquility by HeHe for more information about the birth lounge and more tips to how you can have an informed and confident birth. Otherwise, we will see you next week for another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. Bye, y'all. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you next time on the Birth Lounge podcast. Until then, head over to Instagram and find us at Tranquility by HeHe and give us a follow. You can also check us out at thebirthlounge.com.